From Unity of Houston, Texas, this is the Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational spiritual community providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress now with Reverend Howard Caesar.
I think we can all agree that one of the purposes of our life here on earth is to awaken spiritually, to grow, to awaken to the truth that would set us free, and to simply continue to awaken, in a sense, to realizing who we really are and the dimensions of the divine that are able to pour through us, and that we're able to access and show up in a way very much as God holds us to be. There's a perfect idea that you are held to be in the mind of God, and we're trying to match that and align with that and grasp the reality of who we really are as creations of the divine. And when we do, we become very powerful, and we become very victorious in all that we conquer in life and all that comes before us. We continue to radiate light and love and peace and goodness, no matter what is taking place in this world. And so life is basically a school that we are enrolled in. You've heard that analogy, of course, and there's required curriculum. And part of the curriculum is that we are going to encounter situations and circumstances and events that basically we face, we go through, we deal with, and we seek to conquer. And within those situations, we will be challenged to show up in the fashion of who we really are and who we are held to be, as God holds us to be. And so in those situations and circumstances, we get to find out who we are. And sometimes we find out who we're not, because we don't always succeed at the level that we would hope. But that's what part of life is that learning. It's that school. It's going through it. We have certain things that we encounter. When I was a kid in school, I imagine, like you, we attended classes, and there were various subjects, and we got tests. And I noticed about myself, looking back, that when I was really engaged, when I was interested and engaged in the learning of whatever it is that we were studying and whatever was going on, and when I listened and I did what I was told, and I did my homework and all of these kinds of things, I passed, things went well, things were pretty good. But I noticed also that when there were times when I wasn't engaged and I wasn't focused and I wasn't listening and I wasn't doing what I was told and I wasn't doing my homework, and I just made it more difficult on myself. School became harder. It became somewhat of a struggle at times, or those aspects, and harder than it needed to be. And whatever resistance that I had going on inside of me was part of it. Well, the same is true of our spiritual life. We go to school, and we are to be engaged in this life and connected and be listening to the voice of spirit, the voice of intuition, the voice of guidance within us that is always prompting us and wanting to help and assist us in being engaged with life and engaged in the process of bringing forth the highest that is in us. And that's a process, and that's something we have to give ourselves to. It's all about learning. It's all about growth. And that learning curve in life spiritually is sometimes referred to as moving from being asleep to becoming awake spiritually. And it just makes sense, at night we're asleep, we don't see anything, it's dark. In the morning, the light dawns, it's a new day, we get to see again, there's a new perspective. So symbolically, the scriptures also talk about the idea of being asleep is to be asleep spiritually, to not have the perspective of truth, to not really know who you are, to not be knowing who you are in these different situations and circumstances, and to be in the darkness of ignorance and misunderstanding, whereas one being in the light is in the light of understanding and the light of stepping forth in truth. So that's the goal, and we don't always pass that. And so when we were in school, we had, at least I did, going through the grades, I had one teacher all day long in all the different courses. And when I got to high school and college, of course, you had different teachers for different topics and subjects. And in the school of life, we have many teachers, and they just keep showing up. And the teachers aren't just people. They're events and situations and circumstances and happenings and occurrences, unique timings of things that happen. But of course, many of our teachers are also individuals and people. They can be family members, they can be our children, they can be our spouse, they can be a relative, they can be a co-worker, they can be your neighbor, they can be a stranger. Our teachers are everywhere. Every day we're encountering the potential for teachers. If we're engaged, if we're present, if we're in the moment, and if we notice how it is we're showing up or what it is that is coming at us from any one person. They might just say one thing that will make your day, that says, I really learned something from that person, what was shared or exchanged. But the greatest of all teachers, of course, is not just a voice external, but of the voice within you. It's actually getting quiet enough to sit down and be with the inner voice that is always seeking to help assist the spirit within, the voice of intuition. Now, today, I'd like to have us just talk a little bit about our spiritual wake-up calls. I assume that we've all had some. I have had some spiritual wake-up calls, and I assume that you do. And it seems like as we go through life, there are moments and times where we get these loud signals and signs for some kind of opportunity to change, make a new choice, to grow, to learn something, make an adjustment, a new decision that takes us into inner states of consciousness that are stronger and are evolving and perfecting themselves, awakening. And so we are never intended in this life to remain in consciousness the same, to be static. It's a dynamic world in which we live, and we are here and signed up to learn and to grow. And so as long as we feel like we are, to some extent, have carved out an aspect of our life that is devoted to consciously entering into growth and our personal awakening spiritually, we will really be benefiting from that in many, many ways. And so on some level, I think we typically know where certain changes need to be made in us. I mean, I really do. And sometimes we want to look the other way. I need to change this, or I need to work on that. And, we'll do a little bit of that, or we just don't act on what it is that comes to our focus. We kind of put it off. And then what happens is then there are more signs and more signals and more pronounced that we need to work on this. We need to look at this. Something needs to be done. You can't maintain that because that's not who you are. And that's not in alignment with a universal law and principle. You have to get on top of that. You have to be in harmony with it. You need to be in alignment with it. There's something here to learn, another level of trust, another level of faith, to be able to reap the benefits of peace and love and joy internally, which are always the signs that you're really on target. And so, I met a person who had a dream. They shared with me that they personally interpreted the dream, and they said it was a very strong message that they got in this dream. And in their mind, the message was, for them, without a doubt, this was a lady, that she was to wake up to the spiritual dimension that basically she had been asleep to. And the way she put it, she says that I was to wake up to the spiritual dimension or die. That was her terms. And she didn't tell me the specifics of the dream, but she said it was very vivid and stayed with her very long. And she said that up to that point in time, she was in her early 40s, and she had been very cynical about spirituality. And she did not take it seriously. She did not have time for it. She had no interest in it. She didn't care about it. There was nothing that was built into her life for spiritual growth or engagement. But she came to that moment, that wake-up call, and she got it. And she changed and altered. And she was very emphatic about that signal and that sign that she got and that she acted on. So the universe is always there trying to help us, whether it be through a dream or whether it be through the voice of intuition or however it may be, to kind of usher us forward to higher dimensions and states of consciousness. Because we're really intended to be beings that live in peacefulness, joyfulness, lovingness, and oneness. That's truly who we are and what we're to be about. About 10 years ago, I noticed I myself had various symptoms going on that said to me I needed to take time apart a while. And it had been going on for a while, and I was getting more signs and signals. And it basically, the message was I needed to have some time to just go away, find some peace, refresh. I was burned out. I was on empty. And this was about 10 years ago. And we had just 2 years prior built the sanctuary and all that goes along with a major project, and it had totally sapped me. And this was 2 years later, and I had gotten the message that I needed to take some time, and I never took it. And so in 2006, 2 years after we moved in, finally I got the message, and the message was, if you don't do something, then you're going to get physically sick or something. You'll have some physical something that will put you on the sidelines. Because unconsciously, we want something, we want something, and if we don't give it to ourselves, and if we don't listen, then unconsciously we will create it, right? Have you ever, made yourself sick so you could get to stay home? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So anyway, that was meaningful that I responded. An unusual event that happens should be, at the very least, dialogued with or reflected upon if it's a very unusual thing, as a possible wake-up call. I had a friend who, during the winter, slipped on some ice and broke her hand and wrist, 2 places, and was in a cast for 6 or 8 weeks. And she said it was definitely a wake-up call about something that she had been ignoring. And she kept hearing this nagging message inside that she was out of balance in her life, that she was just too busy doing, and she needed to kind of balance that. And so after she broke her hand and arm and wrist in 2 places, she said she was sitting in this chair with it was her right hand, on a pillow, and she looked at her hand and the cast that was broken, and a voice came to her because she questioned, whether there was a message in this for her. And the voice came inside that said, "You obviously can't handle things the way you've been handling them." Hand. So something happened to her hand to give her the message she wasn't handling things really right or well in her life, and she got that. And she was right-handed, and she had to have somebody help her comb her hair in the morning and curl her hair, and it was her husband, and she had to ask other people to help her. Whether that was beyond her. She could not accept help prior to that, and so that was one of the things that she was learning. I had a minister friend also that broke his ankle, and he got real quick that this was simply a message for him to slow down. So he had a cast in his ankle, and so now he couldn't walk as fast, move as fast. It was truly, he got that right away. Sometimes the wake-up call can be like a turning point for a person. It's sort of a passage that one is going through. There's a new choice to be made. And so there's this wake-up, and there's the change and the new choice, and you move forward on it. And you may be going off on a tangent. You may be going down a dark alley with your life, and then you get it and you rearrange it. It's kind of like Saul in the Bible, if you remember. Saul became Paul, but it wasn't until after his overhaul. And he had, it was cute, come on, give me a break. If you remember, he was the one that was spearheading the persecution of the Christians. And he was trying to wipe out this movement that was trying to further the followers of Christ and his teachings. And so he was doing all this stuff. And he was journeying on his way to Damascus. And you know the story. Suddenly this light flashed all around him, and he fell to the ground. And he heard a voice out loud saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." Now, there were those who were traveling with Saul at the time, and They heard the voice, and they saw no one. That would be memorable, wouldn't it? That would be memorable, but it certainly was something that got Saul's attention. And obviously it was a turning point in his life, a total shift, and that was a pretty clear message there, one that you couldn't ignore. But if you're going to recognize your spiritual wake-up calls, then you have to begin to have what Jesus said, which is eyes to see and ears to hear. You have to have a willingness to have the eyes to see, and not just externally, but also the eyes internally to see what's going on inside of you. And the ears, meaning the inner ear, to listen to really where your emotions are taking you in relation to the different things that you are being confronted with and the different people that you are being confronted with. A person was driving, a friend of mine actually was driving in the country, and they're on their way, and it was someplace they had to go for a period of time over a period of weeks, and it involved this ride in the country. And they happened to be driving past this farm, and on the farm there was, out in front, there was an A-frame sign, and on the sign it said, "Atheist puppies." Atheist puppies. The person thought, that's odd. And so a couple weeks later, 2-3 weeks later, driving on the same road by the same farm, and sees on the A-frame, it says now, "God puppies." Thought, that's odd. And so, they're selling puppies, so she went ahead in there and inquisitive and said, got to the farmer and said, "I can't help but notice your signs. I drove by here 2-3 weeks ago, and it said atheist puppies, and now it said God puppies. I mean, did you have another batch? Or what's the deal?" And he said, "No, it's the same batch of puppies." "Well, how come you're calling them atheist puppies one time and God puppies another?" And he said, "Well, now they have their eyes open." Have you ever had some puppies born? They don't have their eyes open right away for a while. And so this was his metaphor, and it came from a spiritual place that, until we have our eyes open, really we don't really know. And that's a big part of life. And so you could say that there are Presbyterian puppies, Baptist puppies, Lutheran puppies, Hindu puppies, Unity puppies. You're a Unity puppy. And, you have your eyes open to some extent, I hope, and I'm sure, and yet they have to be open some more because that's part of life. And so we should get accustomed to that, that we really want to come wide-eyed into this life and into each day, knowing who it is we are. And that's the dynamic that we are to be part of. And so we've all had the experience of driving along the highway and realizing that all of a sudden we don't know how we got over the last 5 or 10 miles, right? That unconsciously something was taken over. And sometimes we disengage like that from life, and sometimes we disengage from our connection consciously with the divine, and engaging with knowing that there is an inner voice that is always there to assist us, a presence, and that presence is helping us and giving us signs and signals and nudges and urgings from within. And so we have to sometimes go to the deeper places where we become really sensitive to that. Some people are really, really tuned in because they have made a practice of checking in with that spirit that is always there, that is all-knowing, and is the divine intelligence that fills the universe, and is the life that has the intelligence that's beating your heart and breathing you without you even having to think about it. And Eric Ellenbaugh, he's a PhD, he wrote a book about 20 years ago called Wake Up Calls, and he talks about the various challenges that a person comes up against in life, and he talks about them as being the stuff that we have to work on, the stuff that we have to work through. And the stuff, he says, can sometimes be likened to our character defects. It can be our weaknesses, our limitations, our addictions, our bad habits, our judgments, our negativities, various things. And we have to notice what it is, how we're showing up in different ways, and make some new choices and some higher choices. So life, and it's life and not necessarily God, that when our hands get slapped, it's really not God that's doing it. It's the laws of life. Either we're in harmony with them or we're not. And so that's why sometimes we get nudges and we ignore it. And then other times, we have to get something more intensive. And we have to get hit over the head with a 2x4, as some speakers or teachers have said. That's something that finally gets our attention to actually make a new decision, go in a new direction, redirect our energies more constructively than destructively. And so life in itself is always trying to help and assist, never to harm us. The story of Jonah in the Bible is a great example of what we're talking about. You know, he was the guy that got swallowed by the whale, and there's many lessons within that wonderful story. But basically, the thing we want to say today is, just to refresh your mind, he was told by God to go to Nineveh, okay? And Jonah didn't say, "Yes, Lord, I'm on my way." He chose not to go. He had some prejudice against the people of Nineveh. He had some issues that he hadn't healed. He was supposed to go there to take them into love and forgiveness, and he couldn't do it. And so he wasn't willing to look at his issues. And so instead he boarded a ship for Tarshish, is the story. And it says, quote, he boarded the ship, quote, to flee from the presence of the Lord. You know, to flee and leave. To get away from what I don't want to face. Even though I know this isn't working, it's like I want to run from it. I don't want to go towards it to face it and work my way through it. And so in a sense, he was running and fleeing from the guidance of the divine that was there. And so, you know, he headed for Tarshish, and one of the meanings of the word Tarshish in Hebrew is hard, hardness, severity, breaking, broken. And so when we go towards Tarshish and away from our oneness with the divine, away from following the guidance that would take us to a greater, higher place, basically our life becomes broken. It becomes harder. It's like in school when we disengage from listening to the teacher or to the class, and it becomes much harder to pass the tests, you know, and get ahead in that school. And so, how many of us have felt a nudge from God? And it's basically we didn't listen to. And you know, it's like I love the story of the mother that walks into the bedroom and says, "Jimmy, you're late. You've got to get up and go to school now." And he says, "Oh, I don't want to go to school. I want to stay in bed." "No, Jimmy, you've got to go to school." He says, "No, the teachers hate me. The kids all hate me." "Jimmy, you're 40 years old and you're the principal. You've got to go." There's certain things we don't want to face. And so he's on his way, he's in this ship, and it says in the story, he's at the bottom of the ship. And what's he doing? He's asleep. He's asleep. And going in the opposite direction than from his higher self. And he's asleep spiritually. And so there was a storm, and it was rocking around. What happens when we're asleep spiritually? You know, our life and our world gets shaken. There's a storm, and we're being tossed around in it. And so the others who were on this ship recognized that this storm was there for a reason, and this is all built into the story, that somebody on board was amuck. Somebody on board was not pleasing God, that God was not pleased with. And so they finally determined that it was Jonah, and they threw him overboard. But what that did in truth, metaphysically, is symbolically, he was thrown into the storm. In other words, he had to face what was brewing and take it on and move through the situation and make some new choices. What happened is he got swallowed by a fish. It was a big fish. It's called a whale. Okay? And metaphysically, what does a fish represent? Symbolically, it represents ideas in which there is great possibility for growth. And so what did he get swallowed up by? But a big idea of something that was to take him into a bigger sense of who he was. That's what he got swallowed by. And how long was he there? 3 days and 3 nights. Well, wasn't there somebody that was resurrected after 3 days and 3 nights, thrown into a dark place, and then burst forth after 3 days? There's a lot of symbology here. And so then, out of that, he was spit up on earth, or spit up on land, and he was told again to go to Nineveh. What do you think he did? He went to Nineveh. He had a bigger sense of who he was now. And so onward he went. And that's the great truth. Life is always trying to help us, go forward. And Eric Ellenbaugh, in his book, he shares that some wake-up calls can be for us, and he talks even about his own personal example of divorce. That he says he had some wake-up calls that were suggesting change, and he was asleep, and he stayed asleep. He kept snoozing. And finally, his wife asked for a divorce, and he said, that really was the break for him in moving through some patterns that he wasn't willing to look at, some things that he needed to learn and needed to grow through. And so there are all kinds of different examples, and he gives some of them that are opportunities for wake-up calls, experiencing a serious injury, dealing with a life-threatening illness, having a child first time, losing a close friendship, having a near-death experience, having someone close to you die, having your second child, or your third, or your fourth, going to your 20, 30, or 40-year reunion. It's a wake-up call, isn't it? Can be. All right. Meeting your in-laws for the first time. There's all kinds of them. Getting fired, retirement. So the three questions that you need to ask yourself in this life as you are going forward. Three important questions. How much did you love? Because Jonah was being sent to Nineveh to give love and forgiveness, teach love and forgiveness, be an example of love and forgiveness. He couldn't do it. He had issues, he had prejudices, he had stuff, and he wanted to flee from them instead of look at them and step toward them and say, what's that about? How can I be different? How can I heal that? So how much did you love is a question to ask in this earthly life. What did you learn? What did you learn? What strides did you make in terms of growth? And third, as a result of your being here, how is the world a better place? Those are good questions. So am I making the world a better place? Am I energetically making my way through these calls, these wake-up calls to be who I am held to be in the mind of God? Questions to ask is, what am I not facing in my life? What am I resisting? And what is the learning that is here for me in this situation, event, person, whatever? Very important questions. All of us are in this life. We have wake-up calls from time to time. It's a glorious life. The help is all around us. You have been helped in more ways than you could ever comprehend. You have been loved in more ways by this universe than you could ever imagine. You are precious to God, to this universe. Let's wake up to that. God bless you all.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. Unity is inclusive, welcoming people of all walks of life in dignity and love. We believe that love, strength, and goodness dwells within you. May we all live in unity with God, humanity, and all of God's creation. And remember, as Reverend Caesar says, life is meant to be good.